Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff DeVerter, and I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace Technology. And welcome back to another Solve Live. Now, as you know, the Solve platform is all about bringing information and news to you to help you make better decisions about the technology that's in play for you. Now, I want to remind you also, let's tell us who you are, where you are, put it in those comments down below, and introduce yourself. We will have a time towards the end where we're going to answer your questions, whatever they might be. Now, you can have a comment as we go through the discussion today. As we move through this, there is a Q&A time, a what's on your mind as we progress. Now, if you remember last week, Kent Kingery joined from Microsoft. Kent was filling in for my very good friend, Eric Johnson. Eric is feeling much better today and will be with us here shortly as we move into the discussion time of our Solve Live session here today. All right, so with that, what I want to do now is move into our session. Oh, we got folks from Virginia. Oh, San Antonio. Oh, man, that's our closest person. That's where I am today as well. New York is here. Austin, Texas is here. India is here. Folks, this is a global presentation, and so glad that you guys are all here and a part of it. All right, so if you'll remember, our little program here is broken up into 4 sections. This Week in Cloud, and that's all of the news that cloud is impacting and why it's important to you. Also, what's new from the cloud providers themselves and cloud releases? Then we've got the cloud discussion with Eric Johnson. And then lastly, the what's on your mind section. So make sure that you are thinking up your questions, especially as Eric comes to share. All right. So with that, let's move on to what's going on in the news. And we'll start with some updates from Microsoft. Wrong button. There we are. Microsoft. Now, Microsoft, in their Series X announcements that came out at Gamescom 2021 here recently, was all about the new Azure service of being able to play the games online. And their announcement was seemingly kind of strange, and that was you'd be able to play those online games on your Xbox device itself. Now, this may sound kind of strange. It may sound antithetical to actually use your console to play something streaming from online. But I think there's a message for us here as Microsoft kind of refines that, and that Xbox device becomes not only a place to play those titles that you go and buy on disc, but also ones that you can stream. And the message for us here, I think, in industry is what does this mean for us? And what it means, I think, is more and more we're finding that enterprise applications have the ability to be run from a cloud-based set of infrastructure, whether that is an application that's been transformed to run in the cloud, or whether it's a service that you might normally think is tethered to infrastructure that would run from the cloud. Microsoft also had announcements here recently. People from Mexico, Brazil, Chile. Oh, man, I think you might be my first friend from Chile. Welcome. Glad that you are here, Nicey. All right. No, you've been here before. I remember your name. Sorry, got distracted. ADD kicking in yet again. All right. So I think, again, our message here with Microsoft's earlier announcements about their ability to run Windows 10 and Windows 11 natively through Azure, what we find is are we going to find that more and more these hardware manufacturers are now going to follow the Google Chrome sort of process? Are we going to get away from needing to carry lots of power in our hands or on our desktops and be able to just consume more and more of these, what we used to think as hardware dependent services coming from the cloud? I'll be interested to hear what Eric thinks about this as we move on. Now, also in the news this week is some updates from Tech Republic. And I didn't know this, but Tech Republic has a whole training section, a whole university area where you can go and you can learn about Google Cloud and Azure and AWS and DevOps and Kubernetes. And really what this ad was what it was. But I thought it was interesting because what it was doing was it was saying, hey, if you're wanting to go and retool from one industry to another, here are some great resources to be able to do that from. But I think the larger message for us is I think that we all need to be considering more, what is our position that we have in our organization? What's our job? How did we get to where we are? Because the chances are, with all of the transformation that's happening oh my gosh, somebody's here from Egypt. That is so awesome. Welcome. I am glad that you are here. Again, back to the message. I think what's important for us is we need to be thinking about that next step in our career. So if you are in a position, let's just say you run a data center for your organization, you help rack and stack servers, that's a job that really may not exist forever. So I want you to really kind of challenge you to think about those roles that you have. And even if you're in a position where you are very cloudy and you're very secure, what is that next step in your career and how are you going to get that? Tech Republic is a great resource. Google has a lot of great resources. And as part of some of the announcements, this is some really neat stuff. All the tech providers were called back to the White House a week ago. And there were a lot of really great announcements that came out of all of them. And AWS's announcements out of Andy Jassy is that they're making their cloud knowledge, and maybe Eric can speak a little bit to this as well later. They're making all of their cloud training available to the world as well, because the smarter people can be in the cyberspace, the cybersecurity world, the better off we will all be. In fact, I think that's one of the large drivers of what's sending so many companies to the cloud today. Again, another topic for Eric later. I wish it was time for him. All right, so let's move on to our next section, and that's what's new in cloud provider from the cloud providers. We'll start with AWS. Now, in the announcements, I've got two of them from AWS. You'll find, I think, a thread, and I'll tie those together for you here shortly. But their first announcement is the Amazon FSx file system is now able to connect natively to the NetApp ONTAP service. Now, the reason that this is kind of cool is natively now through that ONTAP service, you're now able to, inside of NetApp, create a snap mirror location out natively inside of AWS. And what this means to you is now you're able to actually migrate to the cloud, your data, your VMs, all of that stuff out to the cloud, really while you go about your day's business, while you're sleeping. This is huge. Now, also from AWS is there some announcements around their S3 multi-region access points acceleration. Now, 60% faster between these access points. And the reason this is important, now the NetApp was important because it gets rid of a barrier as you think about moving to AWS or to the cloud. Now, the reason this announcement is important is because it removes a barrier, and even more so than removing a barrier, it creates capability where one didn't necessarily exist at this level and at this level of performance inside of our private data centers, making the cloud an even more compelling location or opportunity. Now, if we jump over into the Azure world, we've got some updates in how you access your files. So the Azure Files now supports SMB protocol 3.11. 3.1.1 and the updates that are there. Also, there's some updates in the SMB multi-channel for Azure Files. Now, what this does is it increases performance for this type of access, as well as decreasing cost of ownership in the way that this operates. And then lastly, on the Azure front, Azure Files now support storage capacity reservations in their premium, hot, and their cool tiers. Now, again, what we're driving towards here is lowering the cost of ownership here in the ability, when you know you're going to be consuming a ton of storage in the space, in your ability to actually reserve it. And when you create reservations, you're able to do that at a lower cost. So all about being strategic about your move to the cloud. Remember, folks, it's not about just picking stuff up and moving it out to the cloud. It's about how you do that strategically and how you do that over time. Eric and I are going to talk about that shortly. Now, over on the GCP front, Anthos clusters now supporting VMware 1.7.3.GKE.6. Ultimately, what we mean here is we're picking up all of the security patches, all of the functionality patches over in Google, which is great. And then also their cloud functions have seen an update as well. This is in preview, so use it at your own risk. But they're continuing to make updates to their serverless capabilities. And then also cloud monitoring has seen some updates. And this is kind of cool because now you can actually configure how long monitoring waits to close out an incident when it stops seeing issues from whatever was throwing those issues. So creating intelligence and tunable intelligence in their monitoring capabilities. All right, folks, now we get to move on into our cloud discussions. And today, to do that, I get to introduce to you my very good friend, Eric Johnson. I've known Eric for a really long time. He and I used to work together here at Rackspace. And why don't we go ahead and bring him up onto stage? He left Rackspace to go become a principal developer advocate over at AWS. Eric, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here. One of my more flattering pictures. I appreciate that. You hunted really hard to find a good picture.
You know, Eric, I got to say, you actually made this relatively easy because there's not a lot out there. You need to post some more stuff and some more pictures. Because I had the nice one at the beginning and the little placard, but all bets are off once it's time to talk.
There aren't a lot of great pictures of Eric. I'm funny, not pretty. I'm not even really that funny, but you take your choice.
Well, you're leaning into it, which is good. Hey, welcome from Mexico. Love that you're speaking Spanish. Wish I understood it more. India's here. UK is here. Colin, welcome. I'm glad that you have joined. Now, everyone, I want to remind you to be posting, your comments down below. Especially if you have a question for Eric. And as our conversation progresses, I want to encourage you also to think about maybe a little more long form question that you might have. Now, Eric, last week, Eric, we had a pinch hitter in. It's a gentleman you're familiar with, Kent Kingery.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so Kent and I talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly of serverless transformation. Now, serverless is sort of your world, is it not?
It is. Yes, that's my bread and butter.
Well, why don't we also actually start with your title, Principal Developer Advocate? What does that mean? What's a day in the life of a Principal Developer Advocate?
Yes. It is fancy. If you ask my kids what I do, they're like, we don't know. He talks a lot, and a developer advocate. There's really two parts of our job. Number one, you watch Twitter, you watch LinkedIn. There's all kinds of conversation go around, but for me, my job is really simple. I help developers understand serverless. And then it's a two-way part. And I also listen to developers to help make serverless better. So we're a two-way mouthpiece where I'm not in there. I don't sell serverless. I explain serverless. I am a developer. Some would argue that, but I am a developer, and I teach developers how to use serverless the right way, not just getting started, but what's the best way. Like any other technology, there are goods and there are not so good ways of approaching it, right? And then, like I said, again, the second approach is I'm constantly talking to developers. I take questions from shows like this, things like that. I take it back to our team to say, hey, here's some improvements we can make. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working, things like that. So I advocate, so it's right in the title, I advocate for the developer to help them learn and for them to the company.
Got it. Now, serverless is all part of an overall cloud transformation journey. Now, Rackspace did some research about this time last year, maybe a little later. I don't remember when. I think we released it in November. But it was, we called it the future of compute and the state of compute. And what we found was that when people are moving out to any of the clouds, we weren't specific to which one, what were you doing when you made that move? And we found stats also that corroborated this around the industry. And that was that on average, about 60 or 70% of those workloads that are moving to the cloud are moving there in the state of IaaS. In other words, we're moving a VM out to the cloud. Is that consistent with what you've seen at AWS?
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because they may be moving to IaaS. We have folks that come straight to serverless, but they do it in an IaaS way. Okay. So maybe that's a little gray on what you're saying. But what I mean by that is they take what they know and they pick it up and they drop it in and hope that it's the best. Yes. And sometimes it's not. So and I'm glad to go further into that as we go. So.
Well, but you guys released some of your own stats, and I think it's sort of telling because while we didn't necessarily look at any specific cloud provider, AWS, I think your community is a little farther ahead than the 70% running IaaS that we found.
Probably so. Yeah. I know. I'll tell you this is an interesting stat, and we were talking about this pre-show, but Amazon itself is at about 50%. Now, it's not a migration, but they're about 50% on serverless.
That's
serverless is a future. I mean, so Amazon.com, they build they just announced a stat a while back, over 50% of their technology is built on serverless. So it is that, that point that we're headed to.
Well, and I feel like you and I live this world so much, but the reality is that not a lot of people, especially as you look at those stats, and 50% is impressive, but 50% are still running VMs. I mean, let's be transparent about that.
Or containers, there's a mix. There's a mix out there of technology.
Well, you make an interesting point. Would you consider a container a form of serverless, or how specific do you get in your definitions?
So let's talk definition of serverless for a minute. With serverless, you put 100 people in a room. I say define serverless. I'm going to get probably 103 responses, right? Because someone go, oh, I like what they said, so you get a lot of different things. But the serverless at Amazon, and serverless honestly is a buzzword. It's become a buzzword that we throw around and things like that. So with Amazon, we basically break it down, or at AWS, we break it down and we say, serverless is you only pay for what you get, right? So it scales, and generally we define that by saying it scales up, and there's a lot of technology that scales up, right? With AWS, we have our auto scaling that scales VMs up and things like that, but it also scales down to 0. Right, that's the only number I can do with my hands. I can do 2, but you know what I'm saying. So I do 0 through 2, so it's binary. But I guess that isn't binary. You're like, is he a developer? But yeah, so it's a 0 and 1. There we go. Yeah, developer. Exactly. But we scale down to 0, so you only pay for what you use. So, for instance, a Lambda function, that invocation, the memory it uses, right? And I could go through the different services, but they're built on API gateway, on how many requests, things like that. There isn't a time where you ever have idle infrastructure, right? The second thing is we handle all the security and patching and maintenance and care and feeding of the underlying infrastructure. I mean, the secret is in serverless, and Jeff, this stays between you and I, right? There are servers in serverless, right?
I was going to get to that.
Yeah, you're like, I'm calling you out. Yes, there are servers in serverless, but you don't maintain it, right? The third thing is security. We handle the security for it. We're going to handle the security of the actual data, the data centers where this sits, the encryption at rest, encryption in transit, all those kinds of things, right? So serverless really, we're driving. It used to be serverless was synonymous with Lambda. Right, a Lambda, we announced.
You guys sort of set the stage with all of that.
Right. In 2014, we came out with this announcement and said, here it is, reInvent 2014, 2015, it became GA, and that serverless is Lambda. That's what it is. But really, what it's come down to is now serverless is a series of managed services that you chain together to create applications. So, back to your question, and you interrupt me because when I get going on this, I really get fired up. But back to your question, so people say, well, what services are or aren't serverless? So if we're kind of using that, yeah, we have a system or a service called Fargate, where you can run containers that are that meet most of those. So someone say, well, that's serverless. To be honest, I don't. If you want to call it, that's fine. I'm not going to argue that with you. I'm going to tell you to use it. I'm a big believer in right tool for the job. Right. And so to answer your question, with containers, VMs generally are not serverless because they're by their very essence are a server that you manage and care for. But Fargate, man, you just take care of the container, and so there's a lot of flexibility there.
All right, so you said a few things I feel like I want to unpack inside of that. And one of them is when you were defining your the serverless bit, where you said it's synonymous with Lambda, and you created a series of managed services. So I want to pause there for a minute, because anybody who's been in computing for a good long time know that there are managed service providers. Rackspace would fall into that term. So you used a term when talking about a service as a managed service, and I think. And you did it rightly, mind you. But I think what we need to do is define what is the new state of managed services, because there is a place for somebody managing things, but it might not be the server anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, go ahead.
I said now it's up to you.
Yeah. So, when I say managed service, I'm talking about literally a service, a named service, and that would be like EventBridge, API Gateway, SQS, SNS, blah, 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 blah. I can go on. And I know what you're talking about, at least, and you feel free to correct me, which I know you will. We go back to our SmackDown days here. When you and I talked to managed service at Rackspace, it was more of the people who manage. It's services that you could manage on your own, but don't have the know-how. And we would step in as Rackspace, as Rackers, and say, we'll manage that for you. We have the expertise. We'll do your operational what's the word? Tasks for you.
There you go. Yeah.
That's not as intelligent as I was going for, but there it is. Operational procedures, processes for you. And so there's a slight difference when I'm saying managed services from what you guys say there.
Got it. But I think that it creates a really interesting delineation, Eric, and that is that, if we go back to the old world of managed hosting in a data center from a Rackspace or a data pipe or a fill in the blank, it was the job of that company then to look after the networking, look after the data center itself, look after the physical infrastructure, look after the operating system, and create a platform where somebody could come on and install an application and run the application. Well, in this new world of this serverless world where you've got all these managed services that when strung together appropriately with the uniqueness and individuality of the company's application, then what you do is you create this application that still needs some management around it. I think managed service may not be the right term, but it needs attention. But it's not like the old world. We don't have to patch an OS. We don't have to back it up. We don't have to do those things. That's the value of serverless. All of that stuff is incumbent on our good friends at AWS or other cloud providers to do those things. And that's the intrinsic value. Now it creates a new set of problems. How are you going to secure this thing? How are you going to, there still are operational tasks that have to occur. It's not checking the backup, but those operational tasks now exist so much closer to the developer. You think that DevOps, now we think DevSecOps, and there needs to be a tighter blend. Rackspace's offerings there. This isn't a sales thing, but you can go to rackspace.com and learn about those things.
Right.
But the reality is it just is different. It's at a higher level in that application stack.
Yeah, it becomes a code. It becomes a code situation, code and configuration versus racking and stacking, right? and there's a whole series. I know we have a lot of partners, I know y'all do too, that have grown up around this and said, look, we have the expertise. Get really granular for a minute. We're good at IAM roles, and there's companies that are just based around we'll create your IAM roles. And a lot of times that's worth the money, because security is job one. I think one of the things that becomes so there's an inherent amount of security with serverless. That's one of our tenets, right? We say we handle all the security, but and I know you and I have talked about this before at AWS and not just AWS, the other cloud companies as well. There's a thing called this responsibility model or shared responsibility model, and this might help kind of viewers who are brand new to serverless. With that, and I don't have a graphic for this, so I'm going to draw these individual boxes in the air, and you'll see. But basically, we say AWS will handle, the security of the data center, the managing of our managed services, things like that. But you, if you're using VMs, are responsible for patching your boxes. You're responsible for upgrading your software, which I realize that patching and upgrading are the software are the same thing. So I like to say things twice. And you're responsible for securing and making sure connectivity between your stuff. And then your code has to be secure. You have to write secure code. With serverless, what we've said is we'll move that line up. All you have to worry about is writing secure code and architecting secure interactions, right? Because serverless, and I was thinking about this, and this is not a branded AWS statement I'm getting ready to say. It was something I was thinking about while we were earlier. There's the caveats. I was thinking about this is serverless is really about the transporting and application of logic to data.
Oh, say that again.
The transporting and application of logic to data.
Okay.
Everything you do with serverless is going to be handled at configuration. Excuse me. So I'm going to configure my API gateway to communicate with a Lambda function, and then the code inside of a Lambda function. I'm never going to build the servers that they sit on top of And so I'm responsible for the security at just those levels. So AWS has moved that model, that responsibility up and said, we'll take more responsibility, taking that off you. You have less levers and knobs you have to turn. You just write your application.
Well, and just to clarify that just a little, because I'm going to draw with my hands now too. So when you say move that responsibility up, you're not saying we're going to move it where it was here, and now we're going to transform it up into this new area that you never had to do before. No, you used to have to do all of this. Now we're just going to limit that amount. So what happens down here? You get to focus only on those things that are unique and special about your data, about your process, about your people, about whatever it is that you're trying to do. It's huge.
That's right.
All right. Hey, Eric, we only have a few more minutes left, and I want to move us on real quick over into our last section, and that's the what's on your mind. And so, folks haven't given us any major questions. You know what that means, don't you, Eric?
We're doing a great job.
It means I get to, exactly, it does that. But it also means, sorry, I have a lot of monitors. I got distracted talking to myself in different monitors.
Okay.
But what it also means is I get to ask you, Eric.
Hit me.
What's on your mind? What is kind of waking you up in tech these days? What gets you excited about tech? What scares you about it? The next few minutes, I just want to cede the floor to you and hear from you.
Sure. I think the thing that's been on my mind a lot, and it's always been on my mind, is the developer and the development process, right? So when we talk about developing serverless, and we've gone through and kind of defined serverless and talked about some things, but it changes the paradigm. That's a big word. I don't know what it means. They just said use it when you go on stream. It changes the paradigm for developing. And it instead of me emulating, hey, I'm going to run an Express server locally on my side. I can develop on a plane. I can develop on an Igloo. I don't need internet.
Yeah.
But now all these things are out in the cloud, right? And so now I've got to somehow test, and AWS and the other services, we've been working on that, but I don't think we've got it mastered yet. And this wasn't designed to be a plug. It's something we are working on, and keep your eyes open. It's one of those I have to go keep an eye open, but it's something that you can invoke a Lambda function locally, and that's really where most of our changes happen, right? But we're working on making that a better process. So I think as we develop, we love to hear back from developers. Where are your pain points? Where's that hurting? And how can we improve that? The other thing, and you can tell me to stop talking. I'm sorry, I keep coughing. I really am healthy. The other thing is understanding the change. Like I said earlier, when we talk about serverless, one of my favorite things, we said, Lambda, serverless was equal to Lambda. But one of my favorite things now is I'm starting to build things without even a Lambda function that are just configuration, right? And so, for instance, I built a URL shortener here a while back that is simply API Gateway and DynamoDB. There's no major logic than just grabbing a shortener and responding, and it's caching. And so we're moving to a world, and we're not all the way there yet, but man, we're coming super close where, and I don't want to throw around, low code, no code, those kinds of things. That's not what I'm throwing around, but it is, we move more to configuration than code, and it's pretty amazing. And I think we're scratching the surface of what we can be doing.
Right. Hey, I got a question for you, and it comes from none other than Kent Kingery. And his question is, why is Jeff so much more handsome? No, that wasn't it. It was, it says, great point about the paradigm shift. So what do you see as the biggest hurdle for developers moving from traditional application structures to serverless? And we'll end with that.
Yeah, well, I think one is the mindset. Is understanding I'm not building legacy, all my functions in a single application. We're building distributed applications across. And so we're instead of PubSub being built into our application, it's built into our architecture. So that's the first thing. The second thing is helping developers understand what can I test really quick and what do we need to push out to the cloud to test against and run our integration tests or unit test, things like that. So I think it's that helping them understand the development life cycle better. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, because it is totally different. Well, folks, we have come to the end of our time, unfortunately, and so grateful, Eric, that you were able to get up early. You are in Mountain Time, so thanks for taking the pain for us.
Anytime, buddy.
You bet. And folks, we will be back next week with another Solve Live. My name is Jeff DeVerter. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace. And that is Eric Johnson. Eric, last question for you. How can people find you? And we will post this in the thread as well.
Best way to find me is on Twitter at EDJGeek. I try to answer questions. So, yeah, EDJ Geek.
On the Twitters. Excellent.
Yep.
All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for joining in for another week. We'll be back next week. We will post times. It may even be Tuesday and Thursday next week. We'll see. And we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day. And that's it for us here at Solve Live.